Waitress slips a "help me" note to Billionaire. He whispered, "Do exactly what I say." What if a single crumpled napkin could change two lives forever? Jessica Martinez had been working the night shift at Murphy's Diner for 3 years, her hands rough from endless coffee pots and her smile worn thin by worry. At 35, she'd learned to hide her troubles behind a cheerful, "How can I help you today?" But on this particular Tuesday evening, with rain drumming against the windows and only one customer in the back booth, she couldn't pretend anymore. The man in the expensive suit had been sitting there for an hour, nursing his black coffee and staring out at the empty parking lot. Something about his quiet presence made her feel safe enough to take the biggest risk of her life. With trembling fingers, she scribbled 3 desperate words on a napkin and slipped it under his coffee cup. When he read it, his gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Where are you watching from tonight?" The diner felt smaller somehow as Jessica watched the stranger's face change. Alexander Cromwell wasn't the type of man who usually found himself in places like Murphy's Diner at 11 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday. At 42, he'd built a technology empire that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. But tonight he was just a man trying to escape the suffocating weight of his penthouse apartment. He'd been driving aimlessly when the warm glow of the diner's neon sign had drawn him in like a lighthouse in a storm. Jessica had noticed him immediately. Not because of his obvious wealth, but because of the sadness that seemed to hang around him like morning fog. She'd seen that look before, in her own reflection during the hardest moments of the past year. When she'd refilled his coffee for the 3rd time, she'd caught him watching her with genuine curiosity, as if he were seeing her not just as a waitress, but as a person with her own story. The note she'd slipped him was born from pure desperation. Her mother's cancer treatments had drained every penny she had, and now the medical bills were piling up faster than her minimum wage salary could handle. The eviction notice tucked in her apron pocket gave her exactly 14 days to come up with 3 months' rent, and her mother's next chemotherapy session was scheduled for Friday. She'd already sold everything of value she owned, worked double shifts until she could barely stand, and applied for every loan she could think of, only to be turned down again and again. Alexander studied the napkin with the 3 words, "Help me, please," written in careful, desperate handwriting. Something about the quiet dignity in how she'd asked, without drama or demands, struck him more powerfully than any business presentation ever had. He'd been approached by countless people asking for money over the years, but this felt different. This felt real. He looked up to find Jessica standing frozen by the coffee machine, her face pale with the realization of what she'd just done. In that moment, he saw past her tired eyes and worn uniform to something he recognized from his own mirror during his company's darkest days. The quiet strength of someone who refused to give up even when everything seemed impossible. Alexander folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. When Jessica approached with the coffee pot, her hands were visibly shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I don't know what came over me. Please just forget about it." But he didn't stand up to leave as she expected. Instead, he gestured to the empty seat across from him. "What's your name?" His voice was gentle, without the commanding tone she'd heard him use earlier when taking a brief business call. "Jessica," she replied, glancing nervously toward the kitchen where her manager might appear at any moment. "Jessica, I'm Alexander, and I'd like to hear your story, if you're willing to tell it." Something in his tone made her sink into the booth across from him. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the way he looked at her like she mattered, but the words began tumbling out. She told him about her mother's stage 3 breast cancer diagnosis 6 months ago, about how the insurance company had denied coverage for the newer, more effective treatment protocol. She explained how she'd been caring for her mother while working every shift she could get, how the medical bills had consumed her savings and forced her to choose between rent and medication. "The doctors say this new treatment could give her 5 more years, maybe 10, Jessica said, her voice breaking slightly. "But it costs $30,000 up front, and that's not including the follow-up care. I've tried everything, applied for every assistance program, but I make just enough money that we don't qualify for help, and not nearly enough to afford what she needs." Alexander listened without interrupting, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "How old is your mother?" 68. She worked as a teacher for 40 years, never missing a day if she could help it. She's the strongest person I know, and watching her fight this battle while worrying about the money, Jessica wiped her eyes with her apron. I just can't lose her, not when there's something that could help. The bell above the diner's entrance chimed, and Jessica started to stand, but Alexander reached across the table and gently touched her wrist. "Wait," he said quietly. "Don't go anywhere. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." Something told Jessica that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. Alexander pulled out his phone and made a call that would haunt Jessica for the rest of the night. She could only hear his side of the conversation, but the authority in his voice made it clear this wasn't just any wealthy customer making empty promises. "Dr. Harrison? It's Alexander Cromwell. I need you to meet me at Mercy General tomorrow morning at 9. I'm bringing someone who needs your help." When he hung up, Jessica felt her world spinning. "I can't accept charity," she said quickly, panic rising in her chest. "I didn't tell you all this so you'd feel sorry for me. I was desperate and scared, and I made a terrible mistake." Alexander leaned forward, his gray eyes serious but kind. "Jessica, 3 years ago, I was sitting in a hospital room watching my father die because I was too proud to ask for help when his business was failing. I had the money by then, but he'd never told me how bad things had gotten. He died thinking he was a burden, and I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life." The raw pain in his voice stopped Jessica's protests. She could see this wasn't about money for him. It was about something much deeper. "I've spent the last 3 years trying to figure out how to honor his memory," Alexander continued. "I've donated to charities, funded research, built hospitals, but I've never been able to help someone the way I should have helped him. Tonight, you gave me that chance." Jessica's eyes filled with tears as the weight of his words sank in. "But you don't even know me. How can you trust that I'm telling the truth? Because desperate people don't usually slip notes to strangers in diners at midnight," he said with a sad smile. "And because something about you reminds me of him. The way you care more about your mother than yourself. The way you kept working even when everything was falling apart." The manager appeared from the kitchen, scowling at Jessica for sitting with a customer. Alexander stood up smoothly and walked to the counter, pulling out his wallet. Jessica watched in amazement as he handed the manager $300 bills. "Jessica's shift is over for tonight. In fact, she won't be working here anymore." As the manager stammered his thanks, Alexander returned to the booth where Jessica sat in shock. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, Alexander would ask something of her that would test everything she thought she knew about trust and hope. "I need you to do exactly what I say," Alexander said, his voice taking on an urgency that made Jessica's heart race. "Can you trust me that much?" Jessica nodded, though fear and hope warred in her chest. Everything was happening so fast that she felt like she was in a dream. "First, I want you to go home and pack a bag for you and your mother. You're both staying at the Marriott downtown starting tonight. The medical suite on the 20th floor. I've already called, and they're expecting you. Alexander, I can't." "Second," he continued, holding up his hand gently, "tomorrow morning at 9, Dr. Harrison will meet us at Mercy General. He's one of the best oncologists in the country, and he's going to oversee your mother's care personally. The treatment will start on Monday." Jessica felt the world tilt around her. This is too much. Why would you do this for a complete stranger? Alexander was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his wallet and showed her a worn photograph. It was of a man in his 60s with kind eyes and calloused hands, standing in front of a small hardware store. "This is my father, James. He spent his whole life helping other people fix their problems, but when his business was struggling, he never asked for help. Not from me, not from anyone. He died of a heart attack the day before the bank was going to foreclose on his store." Jessica could see the pain in Alexander's eyes as he tucked the photo away. "I found out afterward that $30,000 would have saved everything." $30,000 that was pocket change to me, but he never asked because he didn't want to be a burden. "But I'm not your father," Jessica whispered. "No, but you're someone's daughter. And tonight, I have the chance to make sure that Mother doesn't have to worry about whether she can afford to live." Alexander's voice was steady, but Jessica could see his hands trembling slightly. "This isn't charity, Jessica. This is healing." The rain had stopped, and through the diner's windows Jessica could see the first hints of dawn touching the horizon. Everything in her life had changed in the space of a single conversation with a stranger who understood loss in a way she'd never expected. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice small but certain. Alexander smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely happy. "Just let me help." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. The final piece of Jessica's journey was about to unfold in ways that would touch both their lives forever. 6 months later, Jessica stood in the kitchen of her new apartment, watching her mother tend to the small herb garden they'd planted on the balcony. The chemotherapy had been tough, but the latest tests showed no signs of cancer. Dr. Harrison had been cautiously optimistic, using words like remission and full recovery that had seemed impossible just months ago. Alexander had kept his promise in ways that went far beyond money. He'd made sure Jessica's mother received the best care available, but more than that, he'd become an unexpected friend to both women. He visited every week, sometimes bringing flowers for her mother, sometimes just sitting quietly while she recovered from treatments. Jessica had learned that his own mother had died when he was young, and she began to understand that their healing was mutual. The job Alexander had arranged for Jessica at his company's foundation had turned out to be more than just a way to pay back his generosity. She discovered she had a gift for connecting with people in crisis, for seeing past their desperation to their dignity. Within 3 months, she was managing the foundation's emergency assistance program, helping other families navigate medical crises with the same compassion Alexander had shown her. "Jessica, he's here," her mother called from the living room, her voice stronger than it had been in years. Alexander appeared in the doorway, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the slightly nervous expression she'd come to recognize when he had something important to discuss. "How are my 2 favorite ladies today?" "Plotting world domination from the herb garden," Jessica's mother replied with the humor that had returned along with her health. "But we'll settle for dinner. You're staying tonight, right?" Alexander had become something like family to them, filling a space in their small circle that neither woman had realized was empty. He'd told Jessica once that before that night at the diner, he'd been successful but profoundly lonely, surrounded by people who wanted things from him, but no one who simply wanted his company. "Actually, I have something to discuss with you both," Alexander said, holding up the envelope. "The foundation is opening a new branch in Seattle, and we need someone to run it. Someone who understands what it feels like to need help and what it means to receive it with dignity." Jessica's mother reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Sounds like they need you, honey." As Alexander outlined the position, Jessica realized that the desperate woman who had slipped a note to a stranger in a diner had grown into someone who could offer hope to others in their darkest moments. The scared waitress was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the greatest courage comes from asking for help, and the greatest gift comes from providing it. That night, as they sat around the dinner table sharing stories and laughter, Jessica looked at the 2 people who had become her family and understood that healing isn't just about curing illness. Sometimes it's about finding the courage to trust, the wisdom to accept help, and the grace to pass that kindness forward. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining Jessica and Alexander on this journey of hope, healing, and the unexpected connections that can change everything.